Hello, my name is Stacy Odell, and as an American, I always had a preconceived idea when I heard it's time for tea. So I'm asking you, what do you think when you hear it's time for tea? Do you think of some ladies sitting around talking? Do you think that their friends come over? Do you think time stops for that moment and there is tea time? There's a specific time of the day for it. Those were some of the things that I thought. And so I decided to investigate this a little bit further and see exactly what was the big deal about the tea time. I also thought, well, it's definitely a table set. There's going to be all the little treats around. There's going to be the ladies in the fancy hats, and there's going to be the fancy dresses, and it's going to be very proper. These were all things that I perceived as tea time. Boy, was I wrong. I went to the British shop, the British Village shop in La Mesa, California. This place is known for teas, but it actually had quite a bit more than that, and that was something that surprised me. What I learned there was that this shop had just about everything you might need for someone who lives in England. So, for instance, they would have items that were specifically geared for those in England. Preserves, so the English brand preserves. They had English teas there. Of course, they did have teas. They also did sell tea sets and tea infusers, and we took some time and we smelt the different teas, and they smelled delicious. They also had specific brand cups. They had little crackers and cookies and cakes and lots of little treats. They had, it looked like a store almost. There was a store for these English products that they carried in this store. I met the woman who worked there. Her name was Jackie. I had been to this store several times, but not in the last year and a half. I went in there specifically for a type of cookie that they sold there. It was a shortbread cookie, and it was a specific brand. I have since found it in other places as the years have gone on, but several years ago at my church, we had a speaker from Australia. And we all know Australia has a very big English influence. So they had this Australian speaker come in, and he loved to drink tea, but he had to drink his tea with a specific shortbread cookie. And we had only been able to find it in this one store. Now, like I said, we since have found it in other places. So I haven't been to this store most recently. The store was recently purchased by another family, but they are still English. And so when you go in, the woman I met, her name was Jackie, and she had an English accent, and she was wearing a shirt that said, I can't remember exactly now, but it said, "Keep calm, there's a British working here," or something to that effect, definitely recognizing her as someone who was British. And so, but immediately you could tell when she started talking, she had that British accent. And so I explained to her what I was doing there, and she allowed me to talk to her. And so I asked her these questions, and then she did explain to me the things in the shop and how these were exclusively English brands, and how these were items that you could buy in England, and so they offered them there in that store. They also did have, of course, your mainstream items, so they did have Doctor Who paraphernalia, and they had some Beatles paraphernalia, and they had things you could hang on your wall that were specifically England or English or British oriented. Then as we were walking through and we were smelling the different teas, and she was showing me the different kinds of things, I asked her, I said, why would you guys drink, or why do the British drink tea rather than coffee? And she said that she believes it was from the Indian influence. So as they were doing traveling, or people were immigrating or migrating around, they found the teas in India and they brought them over to England. And so since they didn't grow coffee beans and in that area where they were coming from, or where they were traveling, or how their travels took them to and fro to these different places, they didn't have the coffee beans, they found tea leaves. And India was a big influence on them getting those tea leaves there. So I did a little research on my own, and I looked up YouTube and I looked for videos that explained why English prefer tea. And I found a very interesting video from a man who said that English people didn't like to drink water. And so that was one of the reasons why they started drinking tea. He did mention that they had different things before that also. So there were some alcoholic beverages that they would rather drink besides the tea. And when those resources ran dry or were less available, they switched to tea, because they most definitely were not going to drink water. Only the poor people drank water. And so that is why they drank the tea. And tea was the common beverage of choice for those in England, because if you were poor, you drank water. So you were not going to drink the water just because you wanted to show that you were not poor. So what I thought tea time was this grandiose time of day, a set apart time of day where you had your friends come over, and it was very elegant, it was very set up, it was a time of just sitting around and relaxing and having a treat or two. And so this was something decadent. And what it actually is what we would commonly call probably drinking coffee. As Americans, we go through Starbucks, and Starbucks is just so popular. And so that's really what tea time was. So I asked Jackie this too. I told her, I said, so how does tea time work in England? How does it work? And she looked at me and very, very easily just said, she goes, I have no idea. We never did anything like that. And I was floored. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I thought, what? And that just went to show me that misconception that I had about what tea time was and how the British people view tea time. And they view tea time as not really even a thing. It's not something that they do. It's just a beverage of choice for them. Just like we don't have coffee time, they don't have tea time. And so I'm sure back in the past there were those times that they did have it, but it was more because it was the beverage of choice. And it would be no different than having your girlfriends come over and having some coffee as you chit chat. So tea time is not what at all I thought it was. It is more, it could be a coffee cup on the go. It could be while you're drinking or you're reading the morning paper, drinking your cup of coffee or drinking your tea in this instance. And it's just something that they choose as a beverage to drink. So there really is no such thing as tea time. As we were talking about this, I was thinking about some of the other misconceptions. And so without even having to prompt her or ask her, she started telling me some things, because we started talking about the tea time. And she said one of the things that people ask her all the time in her store is, what's the Queen's favorite tea? And she laughed at me and she goes, I'm not friends with the Queen. How do I know what kind of tea she likes? And so she said that those are some common misconceptions that people just kind of naturally assume because she's British, she knows everything about the Queen. And so a lot of people try to ask her things about the Queen, and she says, I have no idea. I'm not friends with her. I don't know anything about her or her personal likes or her personal tastes. The other thing is that the items in the store are English brands, and we look at them and think of them as some kind of exotic brand or some special thing, but really they're the things that you would find in our own grocery store. So like a Kraft or some kind of Nabisco, or just any of those Sara Lee. These are all just brands that we have here in America. Those are the same thing. They just happen to carry them in that store, and they're brands that are common in England. So the other thing too is that just because we have things that have the same name does not mean that they're made the same. She took some time to explain to me that Cadbury chocolate in England is totally different than Cadbury chocolate here in the United States. Cadbury chocolate in the United States is made by Hershey's. So there's different ingredients that they use to make it less expensive. And so the Cadbury chocolate in England has a different taste than the Cadbury chocolate in America. So as I went back and I realized all of these things, and I had this misconception of tea and tea time, I hope that I've been able to share with you some of the real ways that tea is relevant to England, and I hope I cleared up some of those misconceptions. And so with all of that being said, I think I just have one more thing, and I think it's time for tea.